in Spider-Man to such a degree, but I'm only focusing on prominent Spider-Man writers from comics. Like, we got Stan Lee, Leon Wen, Tom DeFalco, David Michelini, and Gary Conway. We'll do that. And Bendis and Dan Slott. So if you're watching this right now and you're like, I do not know who any of these writers are, okay, we're going to get back to the film. Because I draw a lot of comparisons because these are comic book adaptations. And subsequent to The Amazing Spider-Man, after its success, then they completely changed the tone of the film. The first Amazing Spider-Man kind of had a somber, seldom tone that it established, very somewhat dark, but not too dark. People also like to draw comparisons like, oh, they're making it like fucking Dark Knight now. That's a bit dramatic and drastic to draw a comparison, but yes, it was a bit darker than previous predecessors, and that's because they tried to bring some sense of novelty into the series, because we've already seen Raimi's trilogy, and people are probably wanting to see something different. That's what they presumed. The Sony execs, such as Avi Arad, Andy Pascal, the writers. But after that, TASM 2 was a complete 180 in tone. Very light-hearted, very exuberant, a lot of energy, exuberant energy. And so when the TASM 2 trailer dropped, I thought it was very disingenuous going in to see The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And I'll get into that in a second. The reason why I think it was disingenuous is because The Amazing Spider-Man 2, when the trailer dropped, I was so excited. There was no way this could disappoint me. I was of such excitement. I was so enthralled to see this trailer, mainly because I enjoyed The Amazing Spider-Man so much. And you could obviously see once TASM 2, the film was released, it was hiding behind this shroud of, like, failure, and which is another guiding reason why the hell they marketed this film so damn much. So they spent about $500 million on marketing for TASM 2, or 400 500 million, somewhere around there. But they barely made their money back. They only made about 750 to 800 million worldwide, domestic and foreign. And even Avi Arad, or executives at Sony, I think, not specifically Avi Arad, but they said that The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is going to make 1.2 billion, or it's going to pass the 1 billion mark. And after it failed, there was an outrage between fans, mainly because the way the narrative was structured in the film, and the way they just, they just disgraced such characters in the film's adaptation, such as Electro, Goblin Jr., we'll call him Harry Osborn, and they quickly got rid of Norman Osborn as a character, which Norman Osborn is a far stronger character than Harry Osborn, so I don't get the necessity on doing that for the film's purpose. But and then you also have the Rhino, which was treated with such disrespect. He was kind of sidelined and kind of like a third wheel per se. Also written ridiculously, but also you have to give some credit where credit is due, because Rhino is kind of a ridiculous, over-the-top, cliche character, where he just wants to cause destruction. He's pretty much a plot device. He's also like that in the comics as well, so fair enough. Maybe it was just the performance, the Russian accent, with Paul Giamatti, so yeah, that was also a big gripe for me. But my main problem with The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is that it's a convoluted plot, and it pretty much suffers from the same symptoms as Spider-Man 3, and that's what I was extremely afraid of. Which, obviously, you could see that now, looking back, that the failure of TASM 2 was an omen that we're probably not going to get a complete trilogy. And, they went back begging to Marvel, but I'll get into that in a minute. But the problem with TASM 2 is that it has vindictive character motivations for its antagonists, such as Electro wanting to kill Spider-Man over something so ridiculous, and how he idolized Spider-Man. The way they depicted that in film was beyond corny. It was pretty much Jim Carrey's The Riddler from Batman Forever. And that's what it had, that reminiscent feel, the way he was written, the little strings of hair on his head, and it was extremely corny, cliche, hackneyed. What can you say more about Jamie Foxx's Electro and Spider-Man? I mean, awful character. Awful, poorly written. Absolutely poorly written. You even sort of see in the film that scenes are condensed so they could sort of cram everything in, because they have a wide cast and so many subplots. Basically, I'm going to sum up the essence of Electro and Goblin Jr. or Harry Osborn's motivations. You want to be my friend because Spider-Man did it? Yup. Okay. It's literally that retarded and juvenile. It's been dumbed down to be such like juvenile and sophomoric motivations that like even little kids would enjoy it because it's a Spider-Man film. But if you're a teenager or who are into film and like strong character motivations that are grounded, this isn't for you. These motivations are not for you. And so yeah, that's pretty much the essence of it. The only positives I feel with first let me get into the dude, you cannot forget the Amazing Spider-Man issue 121, the death of Gwen Stacy. That was so executed perfectly by the end of the film. Everything leading up to this one moment, this one scenario where it's Goblin Jr. Oh wait, it wasn't Goblin Jr., was it? It was Norman Osborn. And it was sort of serendipitous throughout the comics. Like, nobody saw that coming. And the problem with that is because they marketed this film to shit. I'm telling you, there are about like 30 to 40 TV spots for TASM 2, and that was the guiding problem, is that people foresaw that because it's so transparent by the trailer. She's falling. Even Mark Webb said, if you look at the time of the clock, the Amazing Spider-Man issue 121, it's a riddle or something like that. That's what he said. And I was like, no. You can't be doing this with the film, especially with such a vital point in Spider-Man's history where he self-loathes himself because of the death of Gwen Stacy. And they marketed this film so bad, to such a like over degree, to where it's so unnecessary that it doomed that film from its like surprising, unforeseeable moment in Spider-Man's mythos. So, seeing that played out, it was awful. And the reason why it was awful is because when you're meshing all these characters into one narrative, like I stated earlier for the millionth time, but it doesn't play out harmonious. Like, why do I care so much about Gwen Stacy now if I've only seen her for about 25 minutes of screen time in the narrative? There's nothing really progressing. They have an on and off relationship. That's all we see in TASM 2. And they eventually get back together, fortuitously, for just no goddamn fucking reason. Because like, oh yeah, come to fucking England with me. I was like, okay, fuck my life. And then you have the subplot with his father and everything. That's another problem with the Sony, this TASM franchise, the universe, so to speak, is that all these villains coming from Oscorp, I'm sorry, straight up boring as fuck. Nobody wants to see Spider-Man villains, especially the most iconic, like Doc Ock, Green Goblin, and Electro, Vulture, Kraven. We were never going to see him coming from fucking Oscorp. You're basically having like government fucking backgrounds and exposition for characters, and it's just like, oh, fuck that. I'm sorry, but as a Spider-Man fan who read 60s shit, I want to see some real background stories, like, with Doc Ock, how it's executed in Spider-Man 2, when he suffers from a lot of brain trauma, uh, psychological damage after the mishap between the bionic arms in the lab, and there was an explosion. That was neat. That was pretty cool. I don't want to see it. We're coming from a military background, and we're sent by Harry Osborn to kill you, Spider-Man, because we're from Oscorp, this big, corrupt enterprise. And I was just like, fuck. And that's where I really think the lethargic and apathy comes from Sony executives and writers that contributed to this abysmal failure of The Amazing Spider-Man 2. So, with that being said, one of the positives, one of the biggest pluses about Spider-Man, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, is that the suit was absolutely fantastic, the cinematography was beautiful, and it was aesthetically pleasing in terms of visuals. And you can see that it's demonstrated that they put you right behind Spider-Man when he's swinging with fluidity throughout New York City, and it was neat to see that. You see that in the introduction of Spider-Man, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And that's something that was executed far superior than Raimi's trilogy, and that's probably about the only thing we'll get into that's superior. But main reason why Raimi's trilogy was far superior is because it was led by passion, people who cared, people who had willingness, and Raimi who understood the source material and knew who to cast, such as J.K. Simmons, Tobey Maguire. But remember Kristen Dunst? Yeah, remember her? Okay, that's agreed upon. I know that's a very sensitive subject fans would get into. It's like, we don't know. I don't know. She was very shallow and, only cared for Peter just because of Spider-Man. And that's demonstrated by the end of Spider-Man 2. But there are a plethora of other characters that were perfectly casted. Harry Osborn, who was played by James Franco. Norman Osborn. Okay, so let's get into the other thing. Spider-Man 1, which was by Raimi again, and a lot of people's gripes and discrepancies with Spider-Man 1 by Raimi is that it was too corny and cheesy, comic book-y film. I can understand their frustration, but for me, it was the perfect 60s. It had the zeitgeist for the mood for like the 60s Stan Lee. It almost felt like the screenplay was written by Stan Lee, although it wasn't. But it was neat because it very well so has that atmosphere from 60s. Even Green Goblin. Now that I go back and read some of the old stuff with Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, I even depict William Dafoe's Goblin like ha 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 ha. That was so perfectly executed. I don't care what anybody else says. For me, that's indisputably the best Green Goblin we will ever get. And now I know some may argue, but the best 60s rendition, focus on what I say, because when writers take over, they tend to deviate from the character's original characteristics and have their own, put a sense of their own, inject a sense of their own novelty into the character and make them some sort of different in a sense. And so J.K. Simmons was the absolute, I think this is widely unanimous between every Spider-Man fan. Widely, indisputably supreme J. Jonah Jameson. He's transcended than anybody else can ever play J. Jonah Jameson. So you have him, you have James Franco, we already said William Dafoe was absolutely the perfect depiction of 60s Green Goblin. And then you have Rosemary Harris, who, by my standards today, is I still have a strong conviction that yes, she is the absolutely perfect Aunt May. So she did a fantastic job in her role. Very sweet, loving, wholehearted, nurturing aunt And then you also have Cliff Robertson, who played Ben Parker. He did a terrific job as well, being that sort of motivator for Peter Parker.